Hi gang, welcome to Diana Dares to Plan. My name is Diana Dare and I am here to apply the skills and knowledge from project management to the world of burlesque and cabaret. Today we are talking about one of my favourite books. You may have noticed the theme recently, and that is called The Culture Map.
In the age of the internet and the globalisation, we are in contact with people from across the globe, and therefore different cultures from our own. As performers doing international shows and festivals, we're so lucky to meet a variety of people. However, miscommunications, different expectations, and social norms do mean that clashes can happen. This is really similar to my day job, as working in tech often means working across countries remotely. So when I heard of the book The Culture Map, I just knew that I had to read it. The culture map examines the range of cultural differences in communication, leadership, decision making, and giving feedback. Pretty much all the things that apply to my day job and to burlesque. So, before I get into the weeds of the topic, I'm just going to explain that the findings from the culture map come from a wide variety of sociological studies, and the book includes a few anecdotes just to illustrate the author's point. It can feel like stereotypes are being used in the book, and obviously there's always individuals who don't fit into these descriptions, but the point of the book is to mostly explore the cultural differences so that we can better communicate and work together. I personally found that it's really helped me when I adjust my expectations when I'm visiting different countries, particularly when I'm being involved in festivals. It's also worth calling out that everything I talk about is also in comparison with another culture. So I might say that like the Dutch are a lot more direct than the British, but the French are a lot more direct than the Dutch. So it's all relative. So now that that disclosure's out of the way, let's get into it. So the culture map breaks down cultures across 8 different themes. You've got communicating, evaluating, leading, deciding, trusting, disagreeing, scheduling, and persuading. In this episode, we're going to look at the first 4 of these, starting with communication, just because doing all 8 in one episode is a lot. So we're just going to break it down into kind of bite-sized chunks. So the author has a scale for communication ranging from what we call low context to high context. What we mean by this is that a country that is low context requires the message to be really explicit and literal. It relies on the communicator being clear, and unlike high context, which relies on the listener to be an active listener. So, high context is communication that is implicit. It requires the listener to read between the lines, and it is copious amounts of subtext. So, to kind of give a bit of flavour to what I mean, the US is considered the most low context culture. Those guys. So if an American asks you for directions, they are expecting really explicit and detailed instructions. You can't assume that there's like a shared knowledge of that area. This is also considered why Americans often miss the sarcasm that we British love. Is sarcasm is not explicit and it is just subtext. Japan is the opposite end of the scale. It's the most high context culture. So using the exact same example of directions, in Japan you might be told to go left and it's just there. There's an assumption of shared reference points and knowledge of the area. In Japan, it is often said that you need to read the air, which essentially means that you can read the subtext of the interactions that are happening in front of you. Immediately, you can see where miscommunications could arise. Like an American at a Japanese festival might expect clear and detailed instructions on how an event will run, where to locate things, what those expectations are. The Japanese person's more likely to provide like high level information, just assuming that the American will infer the rest. So when a low context culture is communicating with a high context one, the key thing here is to ask explicit questions. Especially if you're the one that's visiting the high context culture. The onus is really on you to ask explicitly for the information that you need instead of assuming that someone's going to answer your question in the way that you would normally expect them to. The second theme that we're going to look at is evaluating, which is essentially is negative feedback given directly or indirectly. So direct feedback in cultures in this context give negative feedback publicly, don't consider them personal, and they often use upgrader words such as like totally and utterly and strongly. The Dutch are particularly known for this, often comfortable giving brutal feedback in public and then like going for lunch together as friends. Like criticism isn't taken personally, it's instead seen as a way to help someone be better, and that is understood by both that's understood by both the giver and receiver in these situations. I've experienced this personally at a festival when another performer came up to me immediately and gave me direct feedback about her thoughts on a specific part of my act. There was no preamble, no niceties. Instead, she said what she meant, and then I was getting dragged off for like getting a photo. I was honestly shocked because like this would not happen at home. Didn't really know what to say. Um, I think from memory she was French, who are very much on the direct feedback side of the scale, whereas us British and Americans are much more comfortable giving indirect feedback, which might be surprising considering we do sit on the kind of more low context communication scales. We do often find that low context cultures actually give indirect feedback and high context cultures give direct feedback, although typically Asian cultures have a bit more complexity in this. Indirect feedback style often downplays the importance of feedback. We often say things like, we aren't quite there yet, when we actually mean we are nowhere near ready. We use these downgraders, maybe you could do this, might, small change. We downgrade the impact of what we mean. Those from indirect feedback cultures may find direct cultures to be rude, whilst direct feedback cultures may find indirect ones to be false. So if you're visiting or working with someone from a culture that is more direct than yours, don't try and do it like them. You could accidentally be far too direct as you don't understand where the line is. Instead, just do it the way you're used to, but get the person to ask you questions. Those from direct cultures giving feedback and indirect cultures should consider starting their feedback with a positive. We talk a lot in the kind of business world about a shit sandwich. So you give a positive feedback comment, then a negative, and you finish on a positive. There's a lot of research that implies that this isn't super effective, but if you're unsure of how to give feedback, this is a good start, especially until you sort of find your feet on what is the best way to do it in the culture that you're in. It's worth considering where in the feedback scale someone sits compared to you when you're seeking their feedback as well. Talked a lot about this in the episode around radical candor. It just allows you to prepare yourself if you know that they're from a culture that is a hell of a lot more direct than what you are perhaps used to. The the third theme that we're going to look at is leading. In terms of burlesque and cabaret, this is important to understand in terms of how you maybe approach producers of a festival or a show that you're attending. So the scale for leading goes from egalitarian, where the leader is considered a facilitator amongst equals, and hierarchical, where the leader directs from the front and communication follows those really strict hierarchical lines. Italy is quite high on the hierarchical scale, so which means it's not appropriate to question your boss directly or in public. You ask for permission to do things and you defer to authority. I've been to a couple of Italian festivals and I think I witnessed this firsthand. The producers ran a really tight ship. The staff didn't do things unless they were directed to, and they didn't seem super open to suggestions to change things, such as like tech order if someone wasn't ready. So it's just kind of things to keep in mind if you are in a culture that's a bit more hierarchical. On the other hand, a good example of an egalitarian culture is Denmark. It's a culture where individual achievement is downplayed. It's always a group achievement. Communication with leaders is quite informal. People often ask for forgiveness and not necessarily for permission, which is very much where I lie on that scale. If you're ever in doubt when communicating with someone new, just go for the hierarchical approach. Ask permission, don't challenge and follow instructions. The default being that way just means you're less likely to offend someone or upset someone and or potentially step on someone's toes. Last for today, we are exploring the theme of deciding. This might not be as relevant as like a traveling performer, but I still think it's quite an interesting topic. So I'm just going to very quickly cover it for completion's sake. So the deciding scale goes from consensual, which is a group agreement is made on a decision, and top down, which is where the decision is made from a boss and carried out. So as you can imagine, there's a really close link to this and leadership style. But occasionally it does actually vary, which is those are quite interesting cases. So in Japan, ideas are circulated, discussions are had quietly, and then when a meeting does actually occur, the decisions already been made. It almost happens behind closed doors, so everyone gets together, there's no conflict, and everyone's already on the same page. The downside to this is it does mean it's difficult to change a decision. They're often kind of set in stone, and it can be a lot harder to kind of quickly flex based on like new information because it has to be recirculated and a consensus reached again. Americans tend to be a lot more top down. They believe in strong leaders making decisions. However, these decisions can change when new data is provided. I'm not going to comment on how this elevates toxic masculinity and the results in their current president, but you can infer. The biggest conflicts here are changing decisions and speed of decision making. So top down decisions can happen in a meeting, but they can also change quite quickly afterwards. And this can be really disorientating and inspire a lack of confidence in those who are from cultures that are used to decisions being made and stuck to. On the other hand, this consensual decision making can make bosses feel like they have to convince people of their idea, and that people are too slow and reluctant to adapt to change when like new information is presented. As I said, decision making is maybe something you're less likely to come across or be impacted by as a performer. But I do think it just gives additional insight into sort of how our culture functions. I personally just think it's an interesting thing as well, and sort of falls into understanding the culture as a whole. So that is our first 4 themes in the culture map done. I hope you enjoyed it. I would genuinely love to know if it's made you like reflect on anything, any experiences you've had, maybe thinking about how you interact with people. Like, please do let me know in the comments. I genuinely love to hear about it. If you do have any questions, queries, comments, thoughts, feelings, we'll pop them down below as well. I am here for you, so please do ask me anything that you need to. And I can't wait to see you next time until we go through the rest of the videos. Bye, gang!